So for this presentation, Norm is going to be talking about season extension and using regular and modified Hanley tunnels properly. And the topics that he's going to cover are why it works and why it cannot be changed, the lack of ends and how to get in, and what changes when you go to the modified shape. And so we're going to have a Q&A following his presentation. So you can type the questions in the question box, or once he's finished, you can unmute yourself and ask a question that way as well. And just as a reminder, you can get our greenhouse book free, the ebook free, and the link for that is in the chat. And if you message me directly or email me, then you can be entered into our giveaway draw for anybody attending today. So Norm, take it away.
Thank you, Andy. Since you were so quick at being able to find pictures on the last one, maybe you could put up a picture of a regular, what we call a regular Hanley, just as a reference point for starting. So we have been doing the Hanley tunnels now for, probably 6-7 years. And when an individual came to me the first time with the idea, my first reaction was like, what kind of a harebrained idea is this? Because everything that we do, everything that I've done for years and years has all been, proper hardware, proper bracing, proper brackets, and all of this kind of stuff. And the Hanley tunnel is without any of this. Like there's no bracing, there's no fasteners, everything is not there. And so it really became important for me to understand, why is this concept working? Because obviously it was working, and it has worked for a lot of people for quite some time. And one of the things that I realized is that this is actually, in a way, it's going back to what I was working with way back when I was a teenager. My first job in the nursery, this was a shape that was similar to that. And so anyway, these structures are extremely aerodynamic. And it is important to understand as to what makes them so aerodynamic. And then you also get an appreciation for. Now, the key to the success of a tunnel is in the tension of the rope. Now, if you look at this picture closely, you will see in between each pair of hoops, there's a rope that comes across from the side. It crisscrosses and basically attaches at the base of the next arch. And so, and then of course the plastic is longer than what it needs to be, so that there is the possibility of making a tail at the one end, and having the plastic tied there. Now, because of everything that I work with, and I've got years of experience behind it, the tunnels was something that I didn't have. So when I had the opportunity of helping installing one of those tunnels, because like I just wanted to have that physical exposure to like how to fasten the tail, for example, it's important to do it right. And whereas most of the buildings that we sell, there's actually a fair bit of leeway, different things you can do, and it's all part of tweaking the package so that it's, it does what you need it to do. Whereas with the tunnels, there is a very narrow range of what works and what doesn't work, and just being able to convey to people why things are done in a certain way and they cannot be changed is important to convey to people so that they don't start messing with the concept and just setting themselves up for problems. In this picture, you will see that the person has put some sandbags along the side, and this is a helpful thing to have available when you're in an extremely windy location. And certainly with Aaron, what you've said, you qualify as sort of the epitome of windy locations at the eastern end of Canada. Um, the other thing about the tunnels is when I talk about the tension of the rope, what it does, it allows you to slide the plastic up on the sides. And that is the way that this unit is ventilated. Now, the key driving force behind people getting or considering a tunnel is the fact that it is the most economical space per square foot that you can get as a season extension. Now, it's important to understand that because that doesn't come without a price. Now, the price is not dollars and cents that you're putting out directly, but it is in the limitations of what that structure will do. Some of the things that the limiting factors are, the number one thing that the limiting thing of a tunnel is how do you get in? And because there is no place to put a door. So you will be relegated to lifting the plastic up and ducking underneath or crawling underneath when you can't get that open too far. And so that definitely becomes a challenge once there's snow on the ground, and lifting that plastic is that much more of a challenge. Originally, these tunnels were intended as 6-foot spacing only, and with the intention the plastic was going to come off. So then people started doing them on 5-foot spacing or on 4-foot spacing with the intention of going further into the fall with it. The thing you need to keep in mind, especially if you're going with 5-foot spacing with the intent, or going 6-foot spacing with the intent of just pushing it a little longer, is that you might get an early snowfall that makes it virtually impossible to get the plastic off. So, just that's something to keep in mind. When you are tightening the rope, it's important, as I mentioned, it's important to have proper tension. And to get that proper tension, it's a series of activities. What you're doing is you're tightening a little bit, going from one end to the other. Then you're going back and you're tightening it some more. And then you go a third time and tighten it some more, as opposed to just pulling it as tight as you can, because what's going to happen is as you're pulling it tight, you're going to be moving the plastic towards where you're pulling. And you don't want to do that, because then you're going to get maximum dips at a certain point and then lesser dips. And that just means that, well, first of all, it looks odd, but also if the snow is going to come off, the space inside is going to be less. And you're creating a domino effect. Now,
You accidentally got muted, Norm. Sorry.
okay,
Oops.
I'm muted now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so the other thing that is a limiting factor to the Hanley is the fact that the sides are so low. You cannot go full height material close to the edge. So we came up with an idea called the modified Hanley. And Andy, if you could first put up the picture of the comparison. So what we've done is the lower profile is 17 feet wide with 24 foot of steel. The higher one is now 16 foot wide with 26 feet of material. So you're getting something that has a bit of a peak, and you're getting something that has a more usable height towards the side. And then there is the bracket that joins it together in the middle. Now, that bracket is extremely hard on the plastic, so you cannot expect to get as long a lifespan out of plastic with the modified Hanley, but presumably you're going to get more returns, so that will more than offset it. Now, because it is so hard on the plastic, what we've actually come up with is a hybrid in between the peaked version and the regular one as the last arch. So as the plastic comes around that peak and then coming down to the end, there's a bit of a transition. So the shape on the side is the same, but the as far as the abusive, I'll call it, of plastic at the top, there is a little bit of a cushion there. Now, if Andy, if you could switch to that third picture of the, yeah. So now visually, there is not that much difference here between the regular one, which is the left one, and the modified one, which is the right one. You really don't see that peak. Although I think you can appreciate how much extra straightness there is on the side, but you'll notice that even though these two buildings were side by side, so affected or like impacted by exactly the same snow, there's no snow on the right one, whereas there's still a fair bit of snow on the right one, the left one. What you have to keep to constantly be aware of, especially if you're in a situation with 6 foot spacing on the regular one, is that you are going to need to bump that snow occasionally and make sure that you get to it before it freezes onto the cover. Now, everything about how the structure assembles and how you put the plastic on, how you use the ropes on it, how you ventilate it, are the same on the modified one and the regular one. Where there is a significant difference is in the way that it handles wind. And that's why we sort of discourage people from having a modified Hanley first before a regular one, because you learn a lot of things when you've got the lower one, and you're more prepared to handle the differences when you've got the low one and move up to the bigger one. There is a difference of about 18 inches in the center height, which is, from an engineering perspective, virtually doubles your wind load on the building. So once you've got snow along the side, the effect of that, you've got less sticking out of the snow. So the fact that it's higher now is not going to make quite as much of a difference, but uh, it is something to really keep in mind during the summertime or the seasons when there is no snow. And so again, if you are going to be getting into or needing to get into the building, you need to have the area in the front left corner, keep the snow shoveled away so that there is that capacity of being able to lift the plastic so that you have something that you can crawl in, because that's basically what you're going to be doing. So that is the end of my prepared notes on the modified Hanleys. And Andy, are there any questions or already, or shall we open it up to
There hasn't been any questions posted in the chat, but we did have 2 new people joining us in order to check in on things. So I've let them know that there will be a recording posted if they want to catch up on anything that they missed. So if anybody has any questions, they can unmute themselves or type it in the chat. And
I have a question.
Okay.
Norm, so I didn't quite understand like what the differences in wind load between the modified and the traditional versions were, and kind of how much less life you get out of the structure with that modified.
Okay, from a light transmission, you will actually get more simply because the structure is taller. So there's more that's going to be out of the snow all the time. From an engineering perspective, when you increase something by 10%, and pardon the pun, but it's a snowballing effect. Something that changes 10% in one dimension is going to actually impact wind loading or snow loading about 20%. So when you increase the height of something by 10%, you're actually increasing the wind load 20%. So that's why, and that's just something from an engineering concept that I deal with all the time and try to make people understand, because they think, oh, we're just making a little change. Well, this little change isn't quite as little when you consider the domino effect. And that's why, I certainly encourage people to, run it by the expert before you make the change, because I want you to buy an additional structure. I don't want you to have to buy a replacement. That's just not in my nature. And so that, that concept of this shift in the engineering principles is something that really is important to understand from the modified Hanley perspective, because there is no fasteners. It's the way that the rope is tied. It's the way the plastic is tied. And if you have that not quite up to the requirement, you may be making yourself that much more vulnerable when you add modified to the equation. Does that answer your question? And certainly, we have a very good customer, near where Aaron is, and the eastern point of Newfoundland, that has had experience with a number of our Hanleys. And they have come back to me and said, we're so grateful that you took the time to make sure that we understand what we're getting into, because it's again one of these things that when you understand, you can be prepared, and when you're prepared, you have that much more chance of success. And that's what this is all about. We want to make sure that you have success. One of the things that I didn't touch on when I was explaining the principle behind the Hanley is the anchoring. And like, we're going to have a separate talk later about there's no such thing as too many anchors, but I want to touch on anchoring for the Hanleys, because it is actually totally different than what we will be dealing with later. So the anchors in the Hanley are typically 48 inches long. And when I first got into it, that was the first thing that I addressed, is that the rebar that was being used was not long enough. So typically it's of the 4 feet long, it's about 16 inches that's sticking out of the ground and the rest goes in. But the thing is too, that the sides of the tunnel lean a bit. So it is important that, well, the natural way of putting an anchor would be in straight. What you have to do is you have to tip them a little bit. You don't want them at the same angle as the side of the of there, because then it can just slide out. There's no resistance at all. Vice versa, if you have them straight, there is too much pressure to try and get them all the way on. So because what you're going to get is you're putting, as you see on the picture there, you've got that clip that prevents the hoop from settling down. So when you do get that snow sitting on the structure, it's not going to push it into the ground, creating loose ropes, because that's what happens if you get a hoop that moves. You're going to have loose ropes, and then you're creating another set of dominoes. But what you want is a bit of resistance coming in there, so that now when you're pulling on that, excuse me, when you're the rope pulls on that plate and it binds, so it's causing again resistance, and everything is becoming secure. So again, like I mentioned earlier, there's a very narrow range of what is going to work and what doesn't. The biggest thing that people want to do is put ends in these things. And because there is no bar going down the middle that ties it together like a ridge, which then requires bracing, you cannot have ends if everything is not tied together and everything is not braced. So that's the biggest thing that we emphasize as well when people start coming to us for changes. Excuse me.
Maria was also wondering what kind of things that you would put in a Hanley.
The Hanleys, the regular Hanleys do not lend themselves really to trellising because they are low. So like it's things that grow typically on the ground, and that will benefit from a season extension. One of the reasons why we got into the modified Hanley is because people did want to trellis things like cucumbers, tomatoes, eggplants, things like that. And even though the structure itself is not built to properly put up bars and suspend things, you can put up another system where you can trellis on, and now there is room. So whereas a regular Hanley only has room for, say, 2 rows of tomatoes, now the modified one has room for 4 rows. So right away, you know, even though you're spending a little bit more, there is that much more capacity for it. Does that answer your question, Martha? Not ask some more. Now, if you look at if Andy could put up that that comparison shot again of the two arches, when we made the bracket that is used for tying the 2 parts of the Hanley arch, the modified Hanley arch together, there's a hole in there, and the reason for that hole is that now if somebody wants to create something that requires a ridge purlin, we can put a round bar through that, and they can all be tied together. See, that bracket has a hole in it where our 1¼ round material will slide through, and when you slide through, then you put a screw on either side of that bracket so that it cannot move back and forth. And so that works quite well. And then there is a way of putting bracing in there as well. Now, again, because of the way that the whole thing is put together, in most cases, instead of using solid braces, we use cables. which are in the opposite direction.
Norm, I have another question, actually. It kind of goes back to, again, me being on a hillside and having a lot of angles with the areas that I'm looking at developing. Would the Hanley structures be a little bit better at kind of if there was more than like a 1 or 2% grade?
Okay, so all of our buildings, including the modified Hanley, have a peak. So that's why I say, it's important from side to side that it has to be level so that you're not getting more snow sliding off of one side than off the other. Now, on our regular Hanleys being around top, that is the one area that they are a lot more forgiving on, because if it's sitting a little bit off a kilter, like it's still round. So, and it's still round the same way. So it's going to shed, like any snow that it would shed is going to, like, it'll shed it quite well. The other thing that both of the Hanleys are actually quite forgiving on is the placements of the rods. If you've got a string line marked out and you're putting those in, and you hit a good size rock where you are, if you have to move 3 or 4 inches one way or the other in the line, it's not going to impact anything else. Now, you're not going to go move it another foot down the line, like not that extreme. So there is a bit of wiggle room. It's not going to affect how the rope goes on and how the plastic goes on, how it's all tightened. That's all, that works the same. Like when you look at this photograph here, there is no way of seeing what that spacing is, or whether people have consistently put that together. Now, the other thing that comes into play is, like, okay, these hoops, they're standing on their own. When you put the plastic on, if some of these are leaning, what you can do, just make note of these. And once you've done that first pass on tightening rope, then you can just go along in the inside and just push them so that they're standing up straight. And that will, that'll adjust it quite well. This person in the photograph here is David Greenberg from Nova Scotia, and he was the one that actually introduced me to the concept the first time. And so as him and I were just sitting there over breakfast, I said, "What about this? No, it doesn't work. What about that? It doesn't work. What about this? And at a certain point, I threw enough options at him. He says, "Well, can you work me out a price?" And when I gave him the price of what it would cost us to supply a pre-bent hoop, he goes, "Really?" He says, "All that effort I'm putting in, and I'm starting with inferior material." So basically, as I say, the rest is history. Any other questions?
Was there any other photos that you wanted me to share?
No, I think that helped quite a bit. But yeah, it all comes down, and what my hesitation was with selling the tunnels at first is because I've really made it my mission to help people understand what they're getting into so that they have the biggest chance of success. But when I started selling the tunnels, which, while in a way I had experience with it, way back, there was a need to really understand what was happening with these things so that I could convey that, because as one person suggested to me, well, he says, if they fall down, big deal. They're so cheap, they're paid for anyway. That really is not the kind of philosophy that I'd like to expound with people buying a building from us. I'd like a little bit more of a guarantee that they're going to have success. So, thank you all for your attention.
And well, we will be coming back at 11:45 with season extension, moving a structure. And why would you move the structure? What's different about the ends? Preparing for moving and anchoring is going to be the next topic as well.